Thanks, Mark. So, very happy to be here and thankful to be here. So in order to talk about death, I need to tell you a bit about my life, I thought. So I'm going to give you a snapshot of my life so you can better understand where I came from and how I got here. So I was born in 1948. Interesting fact, maybe. I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver, Burnaby, to be precise. My parents owned an ice cream drive-in called the Luxury Freeze on Kingsway, the main street in and out of Vancouver. And it was next to a high school, and I was in the middle of a baby boomer culture. Hot rods, rock and roll, ducktail haircuts. It was quite incredible. I can still remember the feeling of hearing Elvis singing "Don't Step on My Blue Suede Shoes" on the radio of a hot rod in the parking lot of the drive-in. I was maybe 8 years old. Let's see if I got a picture of me. Yeah, there I am. Yeah. All right, took it down. It was so cool, right? The 50s are full of energy, new innovations, boundless possibilities. No one knew that a lot of the household products we were using were killing us. We didn't know. I never really finished high school, which was super challenging for me because of my dyslexia. So at the age of 19, I ended up in a hippie commune of sorts in Palo Alto, California. And there were people running around the backyard naked and dropping acid and doing all the things you hear about the people that did in the 60s, right? I was there. So after 6 months of this madness, I came back to Vancouver and I started working at a company called Shepherd Shoes. The manager at the time, Peter Fox, wanted to start his own business, his own shoe store, so we approached my father, who lent Peter the money he needed, on the condition that I became a 50% partner. Bam, right? It's like, whoa. So we opened a few blocks from here on the corner of Powell and Carroll and called the store Fox and Fluevog. Everybody's using those double banger names lately, right? And we were like, that was it. It was a good name. I really had no idea of what a cool store we had. But looking back at it, I can say that it was really a first-class boutique. And I think it was one of the coolest shoe shops in the world. We had movie stars, directors coming up from Hollywood to buy shoes from us. We had really far-out designs and colors. We started out selling only men's shoes. So think of this. Think patent leather boots for men in 5 bright colors, right? To give you an idea of what my customer base was like and what I was doing. It was crazy times. It was the early 70s. But it was really all about Peter, who was 15 years my senior. I was along for the ride. And what a ride it was. So 3 months after we opened, in walks this otherworldly apparition, Cassia, the supermodel. We didn't call them back then, but that's what she was. She had over 2,000 covers from every fashion magazine in the world. And 3 months later, believe it or not, we were married. And if you mind me telling you a story, well, there she is. So think about how I was feeling. Owner of the super cool little boutique, driving a cool vintage sports car, and married to a top international model. She was a real head turner, and I was the man, right? We were doing innovative retail concepts, like making handmade clogs in the back of the store. We were mixing fashion and handmade natural materials of the time. The marriage to Cassia lasted 6 long years. And out of it came a son who in turn has given me 2 lovely grandchildren. And then in 1980, another death occurred, and that was our partnership. Peter wanted to go out on his own, so he went out and I started on my own journey. So that leads me to, I'm going to tell you a few stories as I thought about doing this speech. It was a little tricky to talk about death, as you can imagine. So I thought, well, I actually, it's so subjective, and I really don't know anything about it, and I've never died. So, yet, exactly. But it occurred to me that I have almost died myself, and things around me have died. So maybe I do have a thing or two to say. So I'll tell you a few stories. So as I said, around 1980, I bought out my partner, Peter Fox, and then the recession hit. I ended up with two stores, one on Broadway in Vancouver and one on Granville in Vancouver. By 1985, the business was on the brink of bankruptcy. Well, it probably was bankrupt, in fact. Technically really bankrupt because I couldn't pay my bills and my loans were maxed out at $100,000. So the early 80s were a dismal time in the fashion industry, and I had dismal inventory. So the Broadway store was losing $5,000 a month, and the Granville store was making $5,000 because it was the alternative punk scene was starting, and I started to kind of get into that. But I was barely treading water. So my business was basically dead. So what to do aside from freaking out? So I looked around and thought, well, if I close this one store down, it will really limit my ability and my buying power with the factories, and I'll just end up with one store, and it didn't seem very satisfactory to me. It seemed limiting. And I thought, well, Seattle's the only place I could really open up, as there was still a serious recession back in Alberta. I had a store there in Edmonton. And Seattle's only 3 hours away by car, so seems all right. But never mind the fact that I had a lease on the Broadway store. The bank had a charge on my inventory, which they kind of do those sorts of things. And I had no money. Problem, right? Didn't seem to be at that point. So I hopped in my E-Type Jag I had at the time and drove to Seattle, walked around the area until I came upon a block that I thought would be perfect for my alternative footwear. And lo and behold, there was a space available. So I contacted the agent, and very soon after, I had a location in Seattle. That was step one. Step two, how to get out of the existing lease on Broadway. How to get the shoes and bits and pieces to Seattle. Got no money, right? So I put a sign up in the window of the Broadway store, space for lease, closing, and I sold off all my unperforming shoes that I had. And wonder of wonders, somebody came by and gave me money for the rest of the lease. Yes. And the fixtures, it was a miracle. Like, whoa, right? So the Seattle build-out was coming to an end, and I had one big problem. I had no money to pay the contractor the $10,000 that I owed him. So, but I'm carrying on like, right? And I remember quite distinctly going up 16th, turning up around the corner onto Dunbar. Maybe I was sitting in traffic or something, and I'm thinking, hey, my car is paid for. I can sell my car. Right, that's great, right? So I put the car up for sale, and no one came by to look at it. And a few weeks passed, and this one guy comes, right? And he gave me a $500 deposit. Yes, right. It's like, and he said he'd come by the following week to give me the rest of the money. 3-4 weeks go by, and it was getting closer to the time I needed to pay the contractor. And the buyer had not come to pick up the car. I then got a call from one day. Yeah, man, I ran into some financial problems, but I still want the car. Okay. And then, on the exact Friday that I needed to pay the contractor, the buyer came, gave me a check for the car, $13,000, translated into $10,000 US. I jumped into the old Subaru and drove to Seattle and paid the contractor I owed him euphorically. Yes, right? So the Seattle store opened and sold 3 times more shoes. I was elated. Like, I was like, whoa, this is so cool, right? I'd done it. I'd evaded corporate death. Right? But then November came along and sales dived. I'd run out of inventory, and with the focus on getting the store, getting out of the jam I was in, I just hadn't anticipated the lack of, stock replenishment. I'm like, duh, right? So I recall a specific day in November, I think it was 1985, on saying to my then wife, I just can't do this anymore. I was just exhausted. I need to find another source of income. I was emotionally exhausted from the roller coaster I'd been on. And on that very day, I got a call from a friend of mine who said, I'm sending a guy down to see you that I'm in California. All right. So this Mexican-American guy walks into my store wearing cowboy boots, sporting a mullet, a bit of a one. And he had a gift of seeing. He was a seer, like S-E-E-R, right? I'm a cynic, but the first thing this guy said to me when he came into my little store on Granville Street, it was across the street from where it is now. He said, God does not want you to quit your business. I was like, ooh, kind of woke me up, right? And he went on to tell me, thanks, love. Perfect. That might sit there and it might fall down. We'll see. I'll put it down here. So he went on to tell me he could see, he was seeing things. And he wanted to somebody else. He said that my name was going to be powerful. And then he could see in the spirit, he saw these shoes. I see all these really weird shoes in different places. And so I'm sitting there and I was like listening to this guy go on. And he said, your name's going to be powerful. And then he said, what's your name? That got me. I was hooked, right? And it was that meeting that inspired me to keep on going. It was a spirit telling me to keep on going, to move forward. When I opened the store in Seattle, I changed the name of the company from Fox and Fluevog. Nice name, right? It's a great name. I'd paid for it. It was a terrific name. But I changed it to John Fluevog. And when I did that, I became a shoe designer. Make sense? I'll tell you how. I never really set out to be a designer. In fact, I always thought designers were kind of flaky, right? I just thought, they're not really getting down to business, head in the clouds, I was like. But I remember driving back from Seattle, and the people that I had met in the store there congratulating me on my great shoes. And I did. It was the start of the punk era, right? And I had all these shoes I'd got in England, and pony hair Dr. Martens, and all that stuff. And it occurred to me that people wanted there to be a John Fluevog, the designer. Right? And I thought, well, I think I might be able to do that. Why not? And I saw it as a mercenary thing, just to keep on going, to keep the company alive. It just seemed like a good idea because they were telling me they wanted it. So without any training or any clue as to what I was doing, and let's not forget my dyslexia, I felt very inadequate. I reached into my mind, and I pulled out a shoe. And it was really different at the time. I didn't know I could even draw at that point. But I started to draw the shoes, and they were quite strange looking shoes, but they worked and they sold. Right? And all this came out of the near death of my company. Right? So fashion at its core is born to live and to die. Every era has its own time and energy, its own music, dress code, feeling. So how does a brand navigate through the many eras and times and still remain relevant? I've been doing what I've been doing for 47 years. You have to go, seems like a long time. Well, it is, actually. We have to keep reinventing ourselves to survive the relentless nature of fashion. So it was the 90s, and I was a man. I'd opened a store in Soho, New York, with perfect timing. I was Mr. Cool, part of the club scene. I'd get on the clubs, no lines from Mr. Fluevog. I had the super coolest employees working for me, and it was like a repeat of how I felt in the 70s. I was like feeling like, hey, I've been here before. This is cool. Like I was, So rock stars and pop stars were wearing my shoes, and I started almost to believe my own hype. But soon enough, my business was about to die again. So around 1998, I found myself at the short end of the fashion era. My wholesale business in the US was diving, and I was left with inventory that was aging, and once again, I was running out of cash. As a matter of interest, I've never had any outside money put in the company. It's always been internal money that I've generated. I knew I needed to keep my volume up to keep my factories happy and to keep my shoes being supplied for me, so I decided to open another retail store. So I looked at the map of the US and I saw Chicago had a big population. So I deduced there must be a market there. So knowing very little about the city, I'd never been there. It was pre-internet, but I booked a ticket and I arrived there and connected to a real estate agent who drove me around the city. And after going in and out of a few areas, I was walking out of the last location, and she showed me, and I had a vision. I saw something in my mind. I saw a large store with flags on it that was sort of a beacon for the Midwest. So I asked the agent if she had ever heard of an area called Bucktown. One of my employees in New York at that time had mentioned this word. He was from Chicago, and they talked about Bucktown. All right. So she said she had, but knew nothing about it. So she dropped me off in a corner in the area, and I started walking around until I came to a large storefront. It was a former theater with a handwritten sign in the corner of the window, for rent and a phone number. So I walked across the street, I looked at the building, thought, oh, that's kind of like what I saw. There it is. And so I rented the space without ever going in it. And I returned several weeks later, and I really second-guessed my decision. It was in worse shape than I had imagined, and I, of course, had very little money to fix it up. I had scraped about $5,000 together to build out a 5,500 square foot store. It was an old theater. It had some interesting bits, but it was really a mess. So I went off with my saw and hammer. That's what I did, what I do. It was October and November, and during that time, the roof started to leak. There was no heat, and the pipes froze. And as I got to know the area, I saw that there was a lot of homeless people, and the area was pretty rough. I even got held up one night in the alley there. That this project was a drain both physically and emotionally would be an understatement. So with very little money and resources and no help for the renovations, I couldn't afford to pay anybody. I was getting run down. And probably needless to say, but I was feeling low. Yeah? So one day I went back to Vancouver for a break, and on the day I arrived home, my marriage of 22 years ended on that day. It was a shock, and I felt like I had a knife in my chest, literally. I didn't know that that kind of hurt existed even. I went back to Chicago, as I had to get the store open. So with my broken heart and all the issues around my store opening, I could barely work. I couldn't sleep. I remember waking up one morning at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning, unable to sleep. Went for a walk, got kind of lost in Chicago. And I'm such a mess. I'm thinking to myself, maybe I need to go to church. That's it. So I passed a Lutheran church and an Episcopalian, but none of them seemed right. And then I came across a church with a plastic lit sign that said, Primitive Baptist Church. Right? And I see there's a brother standing outside the front with his Bible, and I thought, all right, this place looks kind of cool. So I found my way back to the store and returned at the appropriate time for the service and pushed my way past the junior choir up the stairs into a large auditorium where there was very few people seated. I thought, well, they must be in Bible class. Or I didn't know what. I was just, wondering where they were. And presently, the super hot Hammond B3 organ started up. Oh, I love that. It's my favorite instrument. Cranked up, rocking. The junior choir starts swaying down the aisle. And it's still only like a dozen people in the church. Then the senior choir comes out, like 60 people. It was full force. They were just pumping, right? It was just like rocking. And the deacons came down one side, and the deacons came down the other side. The church was just pounding, but there's only like maybe a dozen people in this 500-seat auditorium. All right. So I got called out as a visitor, and they came around with a mic, and I'm mumbling away. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm here from Canada. Thank you very much. Nice to be here, Feeling a little... And old Brother Lincoln gets up to pray, and then the preacher woman gets up. And she said, Lord woke me up 3 o'clock this morning, and I know there's a message out there for somebody today. Here's me sitting with my dyed blonde hair, standing up on end, all trendy, right? Feeling quite singled out in this all-black church. And she started in, and she said, you think you got it bad. Mm-hmm. You think it can't get no worse. Mm-hmm. That's it. Mm-hmm. You've reached a new low. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm here to tell you. She hollered. She's like, I'm here to tell you. It can get worse. I'm sitting bolt upright in my seat, right? Blonde hair. I'm like, ooh. Right? But she continued. She says, but the Lord will not take you to any place that you can't bear. And the organ started to play. The Hammond B3 starts playing old gospel tunes in the back. It's pretty emotional. And suddenly I had a vision. This thing came into my brain. It was on my left. I don't know why. It felt like it was on my left. And I saw this totally white place with no ceiling, no walls, no horizon. But it had a white floor as far as I can see, just white, endlessly. And then I saw this red pokey thing laying on the floor. It's all broken up, and I'm thinking, what's that? And I heard a voice in me say, that's your heart, John. It's been broken. And now that it's broken, I can get in to heal the parts I could never get to before. So after the service, I went back to the store and saw it on a few boards, wandered around, and started walking back to my lodgings that I had rented. On the way back, I'm musing about the old brother in the church, old Brother Lincoln. He got up to pray. He had shuffled up to the mic, I'm guessing he was in his 80s. And he started his prayer something like this. Dear Lord, thank you for opening my eyes this morning. Mm-hmm. Thank you that I could walk here this morning. Mm-hmm. Thank you that I could stand here this morning. And when I started thinking about that, suddenly a bright light comes down from me and I had to stop walking. I got completely overwhelmed. And I started sort of weeping to myself on the street in Chicago. It was not a great place to be. And because I was thinking about how thankful this old brother was, and here's me moaning and groaning about my life. Well, I'm actually healthy and I'm fine, really. But it got so that I could barely stand it, and so I actually had to leave. I can't stand here in the street. I'm crying. I don't cry, and I'm embarrassed, and I can't. So I went around the back alley, and I stood in this back alley for like 45 minutes. And I just sobbed. And in the alley was broken glass and busted things. It's right where the L train from O'Hare goes underground. I know exactly where it is. And I sat and sobbed there for 45 minutes. In that beater alley, I was being washed and healed and reborn, in a sense. And I have to say, the preacher was right. It did get worse. A lot worse, actually. But that experience helped me get through the near death of my business and the eventual death of my marriage. I've had leukemia twice. The first time was 6 years ago when I came very close to dying, according to the doctor. And although crazy as it sounds, it hit home to me that I had limited time on this earth and that I was going to die. Seems like, yeah, you are, John, but it's like, and it was no longer an abstract notion. So that near fatal experience changed my priorities. Helping others to move forward became a priority. Being thankful for each day I have is important. Creating more things. Being bolder in my designing. Focusing on my family. Next generation, right? So, a few years ago, I was contemplating being in my mid-60s and what my life was going to possibly look like in the future. And am I going out to pasture? Is this it? Just, is this all there is to life? I've worked so hard and end up in this position of sort of standing there and my business is kind of running around behind me, right? But I had a strong feeling at that time, or a voice that came to me, John, have greater expectations. All right. Since that time, with the help of my son Adrian, current CEO, is he here, Adrian? Ta-da! There he is in the back corner. Thanks, Adrian, for coming. So we've opened up 11 new stores. We just signed a lease in Amsterdam. I've become bolder in my product. I've assembled a better design team that works together for the betterment of all. It's not so much about me anymore. I don't have to prove who I am anymore. It's more important for me than ever not to do everything myself. I work in community. It took me a long time to learn it, right? We have more community events in the stores and online. I've left the running of the business to others and have spent more time examining my motives and listening. I believe that we're designed to create and bring our society up and move it forward. It's our duty to hear the Spirit and do the job. I'm finding out that the creative process is more about letting go and jumping into the stream than trying to control it. So, after all the things I've been through, the best thing I can say to myself is, John, be at peace. Do not be afraid. And be thankful for this day that you have. And I am. Thank you very much.
Who has, I'm making my sound guy work. Flip back and forth between the mics. Okay, kick us off.
Okay, so the thing I was pissed off about is what happened in Chicago.
In what sense?
What happened to the theater that you were...
Still there.
Still going?
Still there. And strangely enough, it's still there. So, listen, just business stuff, right? So I was in such, difficult situation. I'm bashfully doing everything myself. I said no money, la la la. I had employees that were out of control, right? How do I control somebody in Chicago? So I had heard rumor grapevine that somebody was giving away or stealing shoes in the store. But I couldn't do anything about it. Even though I knew it, I couldn't get on a plane, couldn't go down there, couldn't, and that kind of thing was going on for me. And unfortunately, that person left. And 6 months later, she had a drug issue, right? And she passed away on the streets of San Francisco. They picked her up as a homeless kind of person. It's sad stories, right? I've had, I have a lot of had a lot of alternative people working in a company, and they're like, trying to control cats in a bag, So.
Hey there. You seem to be a man who's driven by vision a lot, and
Yeah.
it seems like every one of the visions you discussed so far kind of worked out.
Yeah.
Can you speak to an example where it didn't, if there is an example?
Well, I think about shoes, and I have visions for footwear, and they don't work. If I'm throwing mud against a wall, right, and not all of them work. But for me, that's okay. I don't mind. And some of the ones I like the best don't sell at all, actually. But I love them, and so I do them anyway because I like them. And what the heck, right? I actually, I think sometimes when we're not driven by numbers entirely, people can sense a human element in what you do. And I go, oh, it's like, wow, what's this here for? And I kind of think it makes you wonder. I like the idea of wonder. I like the idea of wonder in business, like layers, right, of wonderment.
Back here, John.
Hi, I'd like to congratulate you on your talk and thank you and your team for your spectacular use of architectural space in your Gastown store. It's the most unique development I've ever seen.
Thank you.
Where you put those two sides of the two building, you took
Yeah.
nothing space and made it into a space from
Yeah,
nothing.
I didn't make that building.
Well, it was, I mean,
But I'll tell you another story about death. So Granville Street, I have a story you might know. And I was about to lose my lease. And it's kind of, I have my office up the back, and it's kind of like my home base, right? It's my place here in Vancouver and And I just got into like a tiff with the landlord, and it just wasn't working. And suddenly I found myself with a month and a bit to go, and the landlord was kicking me out. It's like, crap, right? It was like really tough. And I'm trying not to freak out. I am, but I'm trying not to. And I remember sitting in a meeting with my staff, and somebody said, "Oh, I heard that so-and-so who worked at this store called Richard Kidd," if you remember that was the name of it back in the day, didn't get paid. And I went, wow, right? So I contacted an agent. I said, find out about this space. And so one thing led to another. And just little things, right? So at the same time, I remember walking down in front of my store, and I see my landlord in Granville Street, his wife there. So what had happened is the landlord just stopped talking to me. He just got into a pissing match, I guess, and he just didn't talk to me. So I see his wife, and I go, "Oh, hi, blah, blah, blah." And she said, "Oh, we didn't think it was worth as much as it was." And, and I said, "Well, yeah, but your husband's not talking to me. He won't answer my phone calls." She said, "What?" She says. Okay, like 2 hours later, my cell phone rings. "Hi, God, we can work it out, blah, blah, blah," right? So that's how I ended up with 2 stores in a city, because I didn't have the faith, I didn't believe that I could, because my shoes are so different, I didn't think in my pea brain that I could have 2 stores, and actually, I can. And I've got other ones in other cities, and Toronto, we just opened another one in New York, we got 2 in Montreal, and 2 in San Francisco, and it started through a death.
Hi, John. My name is Humaira. Thank you. Right here.
Oh,
right
sorry.
beside Mark.
Oh, okay.
Right here. Hi. One little pitch for folks that are in the room. There's an end-of-life expo happening here downstairs, SFU Concourse, put on by a couple of folks named Tom and Annika. So there's a lot of, if you're interested in death, and I assume maybe if you're here, 10 to 6 tomorrow, talks, panels, and folks that are in the death trade, death industry, and pan-death things. So just wanted to throw that out there because apparently some people don't know. And John, my question for you is this curiosity around, during our conversations, Bob talked about how when humans realize death, it can be a tripwire to creativity or whatever it is. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the fact that for some people, mortality salience then makes them bury their head in the sand. And it's, you get into the addictions, you get into all of the distractions and don't do the things that Spirit calls you to do.
Right. He takes a moment. I don't have all the answers, right? I'm just a dude trying to get through the day here, so don't think it's like... But I've been there, I nearly died. And it was surprising to me a couple of things. One thing that really surprised me was how flat I was. I got completely uncreative. I was like, right? And I was not emotional. I had no emotions left. I hardly knew what day, I didn't know what day it was. And it surprised me. That was not my vision of what maybe I'd feel like on my deathbed. I thought that maybe I'd have some, glory, hallelujah, I'm going to heaven or something, right? I didn't. I think everybody's different. But from that and coming back out of it, it took me a long time. It took maybe like a year for me to start to get back into being able to think properly. And even now, I don't think completely clearly, I have to say, partly my age, I guess, but I can't, I came back and I couldn't string concepts together. Because you can imagine back in the day, I was doing so many different things. I'm doing the marketing, I'm doing the advertising, I'm doing the designing, I'm putting stores together, I'm doing the HR, and I'm doing the cash flow, and it's like, all this stuff, right? And my dyslexia kind of works, right? Because I don't have to do anything like super well, but I have to do all this stuff, right? So that was a struggle for me, but out of that, I came, so when I went into the second time I got it, I wasn't as sick. They only gave me arsenic, trying to kill me. I guess I felt like crap. But every day, because I focused, every day I'd take my drawing book, and during that time, I sort of set myself a goal to draw every day. And out of that time came some pretty awesome product, actually. And surprisingly, my design team really needed those. I wasn't kind of maybe cognizant enough to know how much they needed them, but it gave them, I gave them basis so that they could pick up and move forward. So I became more creative, but I was less creative. So is that an answer? I don't know. Yeah.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for sharing with us. My name's Sophia, and I too am an admirer of the atrium space as I live in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Your script at the end of your presentation, Let's Be Thankful, I absolutely love it. And if not, it bears a striking resemblance to something I've seen along Falls Creek, if not
Funny
the exact
that.
same. Do you have a secret career in street art or another secret endeavor you would have liked to have?
I love the idea of doing, I feel so privileged, actually, to be able to spend the whatever $1,000 on that sign, to stick it up there for nobody to know it's me or Fluevog. How cool is that, right? And for a year and a half or however long it's been there, no one's taken it down. Let's be thankful. Nice. And it gets photographed and whatever. And people, and I love the idea that somebody you might be walking by, it's terrific. I just love that concept. It's up in Toronto. I have a neon sign in Toronto, not independent from the store. I paid for it. I stick it up there. What a cool idea. Right? For me, that's like, I love it.
I see you. I'm going to go up here. Chris Benson. Yeah.
The other night you had a fundraiser on Wednesday night for Carousel Theatre for young people.
I did.
50% of sales went to the theatre group.
I did.
I'm wondering how that all came about, all these...
Yes, I'd love to tell you that story, because I think that giving and sharing is a paramount and fundamental thing for creatives and for anybody. It's part of who we are as people. It's part of our lives. And we need to have the discipline in our lives to do it. And I've kind of tried to do it most of my life. Sometimes I fail a bit. And I remember one time when I was going through really bad cash flow, which you know about, the very well-meaning girl writing checks decided not to write the charity checks. I was so pissed off, right? These people rely on these checks. I'd rather pay those checks out than the rent. Now those events that we have in the store were not even my idea, but what a great idea. So here's what happened. The St. James Music Academy in downtown Eastside, we got connected to them, and Ruth, my wife, knows Kathy. And so Kathy said to Ruth one day, can we have can we have an event in your space, like a donor appreciation thing? Oh, sure, that sounds like a great idea. And I'm thinking, well, why don't I, sell some shoes, and we'll give half them away, half of the proceeds. So it happened, and all these older, people that are on the board, fuddy-duddy, whatever people are coming down. People who never would buy product from me, and they're coming in, they're so excited, they're trying all these shoes on, and it's like they sold $7,000 worth of shoes. I wrote a check for $3,500. I get the tax receipt, right? And I'm going, what? This is a great idea. It's a great marketing idea. So just, so it's one of those win-win-win things. So we do it in a lot of the cities that we can where the stores are big enough. And it is such a way for me as a small business to communicate with the city and the culture at large. We can, and those connections. And you know what it's like with a brand, what you really want somebody to do with your brand is think well of it. That's it. Just think well of it. And I love the idea when people think of Fluevog, if they've been to an event, they come in the next morning to their coworkers and go, oh, look what I got, my blah, 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 right? And they would have never bought them because they're expensive. Most people who aren't really into it, aren't really going to do it, but they do it at that event, and it gives them that little thing, and the charity gets the money, and everybody's happy. It's great.
Is there somebody over? They're clapping. I asked, one of the reasons that my firm helps produce these events and is a very similar sort of idea about convening and community and investment and philanthropy and all that stuff, and it's fabulous. And I remember asking him recently about marketing. What works marketing in architecture? And he was like, traditional marketing just doesn't work in our industry or anywhere else. Taking a stance, standing for something, showing up, investing, participating, these things work, which is what you do. And I think I know you didn't do it for marketing, but what a brilliant stroke of marketing.
I just fell into it.
It's great. I'm going to go with a young lady back here.
John, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. My name is Ami Peacock. My question, or really my comment, is when you're talking about the vision and hearing voices, in today's world, we medicate them to eliminate the voices. And with you, it really emphasizes your work and your creativity. Can you make a comment about, as a creative individual, how can we use the vision or voices that we hear to perhaps enrich our lives and the community around us? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, firstly, I haven't told these. I don't tell these stories because, for years I didn't tell them because it's like that's a little weird, right? People think I'm nuts. It's like they medicate people that hear voices, right? I was struggling with my design team, and it was a few years back, and it's really just tough. Couldn't get anybody. People weren't happy, right? So I was in Quebec City, and Ruth and I were there. It was a jazz festival, and we got to listen to this contemplative jazz group from New York City. And then I got to speak to them at halftime. And I was going, I went in there in a mumbling way just for something to say. Well, I love the way that, you guys just flowed together. And, it was just like, how do you use no music? It's like, how does this work? And he looked at me and he goes, you probably think there's no leader. I go, yeah. He said, well, there is. I go, ah. He says, one of us hears it out there in the we'll call it whatever you want to call it, the spirit, the earthra, they hear it. And they hear it and they play it and the other guy follows. There is a leader. And that really hit home to me and was such a lesson to me. My issue with my design team is I wasn't leading it. So, you know, like you got a group, a band, they always break up because one guy wants to play jazz and the other guy wants to play fusion and the other guy, you know, it's just like, I needed to tell them what the vibe was and what the energy was, and then they can go with it and they can play and draw and do if they know what it is. So I think it's important. How do we hear it? It's like it goes by. You grab it. Creativeness, I believe I've been created, and I believe you're all created, and I believe we have so much energy in ourselves and what we're designed to do. And I felt that after I got sick. If you could say I did anything else, I think we're designed to move society forward. We're designed to help others and move everybody up. And when I spoke and I said, well, it's not so much about me anymore, it's better because, and I'm investing in my kids, I'm investing in my staff as best I can. I'm not that good at it, but I'm not quite so egocentric about what I'm doing. But I still think it's important that we can, and that's what I would encourage. If I could do anything at the end of the day, I would encourage you to be bold and listen. And when you hear those voices, do it. Just flow with it. Jump into that stream and go with it. So if there's anything that I did that might be a little unusual, is that when I heard things, you know, I didn't just open up in Chicago. I kind of had a sense. I feel it. Trust it. Go with it. And as a creative, that's what I would say we need to all do. Yes, we're creative inside us. We've been born creative. But creativity is also out there. And if we're just regurgitating current culture, it sucks, right? Who wants to do that? It's like, I don't want to be like everybody else. So that's why I picked the topic of death. I just don't want to be like everybody else. I don't want to do that. I want to do something fresh and new. That has depth to it. My slogans on my shoes and the little things I write on them, they're not mamby-pamby. They're not all wishy-washy. No, they actually have good meaning and two meanings and makes you think and maybe controversial, but I like, I like the passion of life. To me, the spiritual side of me is the most passionate part of my life. It is real. It is a real me, put it that way. It's a genuine, real me. The other part, when I'm standing here talking how I'm dressed, whatever, it's kind of John, but it's not the real John, the real essence of who I am.